The day Judge Harriet Wyndham forgot her own daughter's name, the whole city of Ashford felt like a crack running through stone. She had been the most feared voice in the 12th District Court for 22 years. Juries straightened their backs when she entered. Defense attorneys stopped mid-sentence. Even the most seasoned prosecutors said that Harriet Wyndham had a way of looking at you, not through you, not past you, but into you. That made pretending impossible. She had sent 3 state senators to prison. She had overturned a wrongful conviction that had stood for 16 years. She had done all of it without raising her voice once. Then one morning in October, she looked at her daughter across the breakfast table and said, softly and without alarm, "I'm sorry, do I know you?" Her daughter, Patrice, was 34 years old. She had her mother's cheekbones and her father's restless hands. She stood very still in the kitchen doorway holding 2 mugs of coffee and did not cry, because Patrice Wyndham had learned early that crying in front of her mother was something you simply did not do. She set the mugs on the counter. She said, "I'm Patrice, Mom, your daughter." And Harriet looked at her for a long, searching moment. The same look she gave witnesses on the stand. Before something behind her eyes shifted and she said, "Of course. I'm sorry, darling. I didn't sleep well." But they both knew it wasn't the sleep. It had been happening for 8 months by then. The word-finding pauses in the middle of sentences, the appointments she forgot. The case file she read 3 times and still couldn't summarize. Her physicians, and there had been 5 of them, some of the most respected neurologists in the state, had run every test available: MRI, PET scan, lumbar puncture, genetic panels. The results came back with the particular cruelty of inconclusiveness: no tumor, no lesion, no classical presentation of any recognized dementia. One doctor suggested early onset Alzheimer's, but his colleague disagreed. Another proposed a rare autoimmune encephalopathy, but the markers weren't quite right. A specialist from Johns Hopkins flew in, reviewed everything, and left shaking his head. "There's something here," he told Patrice privately in the hallway. "I just don't know what." What they did know was this: Harriet Wyndham, at 61, was disappearing. Slowly, selectively. The woman who had memorized entire volumes of case law was losing herself the way a candle loses light. Not all at once, but in increments, each one small enough to pretend it hadn't happened. Patrice had moved back into the house on Meridian Street 6 months ago. She'd taken a leave of absence from her architecture firm in Portland. She hired a rotating team of home health aides and watched her mother be tended to by strangers, which was its own specific kind of grief. She managed the medications, the 3 different prescriptions Dr. Carmichael had prescribed, the supplements the Hopkins specialist had recommended, the nightly sedative that kept Harriet from wandering. She paid the bills. She fielded calls from the court administrator asking delicately about the timeline for Harriet's retirement. She did all of this and told no one how frightened she was. The man who noticed was named Ray Garrett. He was not a doctor. He was not a lawyer or a therapist or anyone with a credential that Patrice would have thought to consult. He was 41 years old, with calloused hands and a gray streak in his dark hair that his son, Theo, called the lightning bolt. He drove a 2009 Dodge pickup that needed a new muffler. He had been cleaning the Wyndham house every Tuesday and Friday for 2 years. Floors, windows, bathrooms, the long mahogany bookshelves in the study that Harriet was particular about. He was thorough and quiet, and he had a habit of noticing things. He noticed, for instance, that the medication bottles on the kitchen counter were arranged in a very specific order every morning. Harriet's ritual, Patrice had explained once, her way of keeping track. He noticed when the order started changing. He noticed when one bottle, the small amber one with the white cap, began appearing in different rooms. The bathroom. The windowsill by the back door. Beside the television. He didn't say anything at first. He told himself it wasn't his place. But Ray Garrett had a particular relationship with the feeling of something being wrong. His wife Cassandra had died 4 years ago from a misdiagnosed condition that 2 separate doctors had dismissed as anxiety before a third, too late, identified it correctly. He knew what it looked like when medical professionals saw what they expected to see rather than what was actually there. He knew the particular helplessness of watching a system fail someone who trusted it. He had raised Theo alone after Cassandra died, working 2 jobs, cleaning houses during the day and doing facility maintenance at night. And somewhere in those years of being the only person Theo could count on, Ray had developed an intolerance for letting things go unspoken. On a Tuesday morning in early December, he found the small amber bottle underneath the kitchen sink, behind the cleaning supplies. He picked it up. He looked at it for a long time. Then he looked at the printed label. The dosage was wrong. Not wrong in the way of a small adjustment. Wrong in the way that made Ray's stomach go cold. The bottle was labeled for 30 milligrams. He had seen Patrice crush these into Harriet's morning juice. But the prescription printout stuck to the refrigerator with a magnet said 15. Someone had changed the dosage at some point. And this was the thought Ray sat with for the next 3 days, turning it over like a stone. Someone had been giving Harriet twice what her doctor had prescribed, and the confusion, the memory lapses, the slow erosion of the sharpest legal mind in Ashford had not been a disease at all. It had been manufactured. He told Patrice on Friday afternoon. She was sitting at the kitchen table with a stack of insurance paperwork, and when Ray came in from mopping the hallway and set the bottle down in front of her without speaking, she looked at him with the specific tiredness of someone who had not slept well in 6 months. "I found this under the sink," he said. "I think you should read the label and then look at what's on your refrigerator." Patrice looked at the bottle, then she looked at the refrigerator. Then she looked back at Ray, and the color left her face so completely that he pulled out the chair across from her and sat down, which he had never done before. "Who has access to her medications?" he asked. The answer, when they traced it, was 3 people: Patrice herself, the home health service that sent rotating aides, and Gordon Pell. Gordon was Harriet's court administrator. He had worked with her for 14 years. He was 60, with a soft handshake and small, wet eyes behind rimless glasses, and he had been coming to the house every 2 weeks for the past year under the pretense of helping Harriet manage her ongoing caseload during what everyone was gently calling her transition. He brought files. He stayed for coffee. He was, Patrice had always thought, simply a loyal employee doing his best in a difficult situation. What Gordon was actually doing required Patrice 2 weeks, a private investigator, and a forensic accountant to fully understand. Harriet's docket included a case that had been quietly building for 3 years, a civil fraud action against a development company called Meridian Prime LLC that had, according to the plaintiffs, falsified environmental assessments to secure permits for a massive residential project in the floodplain east of Ashford. The case involved 47 families who had lost homes to flooding that Meridian Prime's own internal documents showed they had predicted and concealed. Harriet had been preparing a summary judgment ruling that, by all accounts, was going to be devastating. Gordon Pell owned a 12% stake in Meridian Prime LLC through a shell company in Delaware. He had been increasing Harriet's sedative dosage incrementally for nearly a year, not enough to be noticed on any single occasion, enough, over time, to produce the kind of progressive cognitive decline that her neurologists, who had no reason to question the accuracy of the medical record Gordon had carefully helped Patrice maintain, would attribute to disease rather than poisoning. The plan was simple and patient and very nearly worked. A judge declared incompetent could not deliver a ruling. A case without a judge had to be reassigned. Reassignment would take months. Gordon had already been cultivating the clerk who managed case assignments. When Patrice understood all of this, she sat very still for a long time in the office of the private investigator, while outside the window, Ashford went about its ordinary afternoon. Then she picked up her phone and called the state attorney general. The next 4 weeks were not quiet. Gordon Pell was arrested on a Wednesday. The charges included criminal poisoning, obstruction of justice, and securities fraud. His attorney issued a statement calling the accusations politically motivated and factually absurd, which lasted approximately 36 hours before the forensic accountant's report was entered into the public record. After that, there was no more statement. Harriet's medical team, informed of the actual cause of her decline, began a carefully supervised withdrawal from the excess sedative load. It was not fast. It was not comfortable. There were days when the confusion deepened before it lifted, when Harriet sat at the window in the winter light and could not remember what month it was. and Patrice sat beside her and held her hand, and did not say the things she wanted to say about Gordon Pell. But the mine that had taken 22 years to build did not disappear. It had been buried under a chemical weight, and as that weight lifted, it began, slowly, unevenly, with days of sharp clarity followed by days of fog, to surface. The first sign came 6 weeks in on a January morning. Patrice was downstairs making coffee when she heard her mother's voice from the study, calm and precise, dictating something. She went to the doorway and found Harriet at her desk, the first time she had sat at her desk voluntarily in 8 months, with a legal pad in front of her, writing. She was drafting the summary judgment ruling in the Meridian Prime case. "Mom," Patrice said. Harriet looked up. Her eyes were clear, not completely. There was still a slowness at the edges, a searching quality, but clear in the way that mattered. "The Kowalski family lost their home twice," she said. "First to the flood, and then to the court stalling. I want to finish this." Patrice leaned against the doorframe. She was not going to cry in front of her mother. She had decided this years ago, and she intended to keep to it. "Okay," she said. "Bring me the Kowalski file." "Okay, Mom." She brought the file. She brought coffee. She sat at the small chair in the corner of the study that she'd sat in as a child doing homework while her mother worked, and she watched Harriet Wyndham work. And outside the window, the first snow of the year was coming down over Ashford in the particular soft way of January snow, gentle and accumulating, covering everything that had gone wrong and suggesting, without promising, that something might be better underneath. The ruling was delivered in February. Harriet did not deliver it from the bench. She was not ready to return to full duty, and her doctor was honest about the timeline being uncertain. But she delivered it. It was 43 pages. It awarded damages to all 47 families and included a section on the court's inherent duty to protect the integrity of proceedings from interference, a section that 3 law professors subsequently cited as among the most precisely argued judicial writing on obstruction they had encountered. The Kowalski family received the call on a Thursday. Donna Kowalski, who had been living in a FEMA trailer with her 2 daughters for 16 months, sat on the metal steps of the trailer and held the phone for a long time after the call ended without hanging up. Later she would say that she thought there had been some mistake, that she kept waiting for someone to take it back. No one took it back. Ray heard about the ruling from Theo, who had seen it on the local news. They were eating dinner, pasta that Ray had made from a recipe Cassandra used to use, the one with the lemon and the fresh herbs, that Theo always requested when something important happened. Theo was 12 now, with his mother's eyes and his father's way of going quiet when things mattered. He said, "Is that the judge you work for, Dad?" "I clean her house," Ray said. "That's different." Theo considered this. "You noticed something was wrong, though." "Yeah." "So you helped her." Ray looked at his son across the table. Theo had a very direct way of looking at people that he had not inherited from Ray. He had gotten it from somewhere else, from some combination of his mother's clarity and his own private seriousness. "I just said something," Ray said. "That's the same thing," Theo said with the simple certainty of a 12-year-old who has not yet learned to complicate the obvious. Patrice called Ray the following week and asked if he would come by the house on a day that wasn't a cleaning day. He came on a Thursday afternoon, still in his work clothes from the morning job, and found Harriet sitting in the living room in the good chair by the window. She looked smaller than he remembered her looking before all of this, but her posture was straight, and her gaze, when it found him, was steady. "Sit down, Mr. Garrett," she said. He sat. "My daughter tells me what you observed and what you chose to do with it." She paused, the way she paused in court, not because she had lost her thought, but because she was giving the next words the space they needed. "I am told that no one else in this household, including myself, noticed what you noticed. Anyone would have." "No," she said, gently but without room for argument. "Anyone would not have. Most people look at what is in front of them and see only what they expect. You looked at what was in front of you and saw what was actually there. That is a much rarer thing than people understand." She folded her hands in her lap. "I don't know how to thank a person for their life. I don't know the currency for that, but I wanted you to know that I understand exactly what you did." Ray did not say anything for a moment. He looked at his hands. Then he said, "My wife died from something that should have been caught earlier. I've thought about that a lot." Harriet was quiet. Then, "I'm sorry. I just didn't want that to happen to someone else," he said. "I didn't want to be someone who saw something and kept moving." She looked at him. It was the look that attorneys and witnesses had described for 2 decades, the one that made pretending impossible. But there was nothing prosecutorial in it now. It was something else entirely. "You weren't," she said. "There's a photograph from that spring, not a public one, not the kind that appears in newspapers, that Patrice took on her phone at the back porch of the house on Meridian Street on an April afternoon. In it, Harriet is sitting in the garden chair, still a little fragile around the edges, but recognizably herself, with Theo Garrett standing beside her showing her something on a notepad. A drawing, it turns out, of the courthouse downtown, which Theo had rendered in careful pencil with the particular devotion of a kid who wants to impress someone. Harriet is looking at the drawing with an expression that anyone who knew her would not have associated with her before that year. Unguarded, surprised, genuinely delighted. Ray is not in the photograph. He was inside getting glasses of water when Patrice took it. But he is in all the rest of it, the sequence of events that led from that cold kitchen floor under the sink to this warm April afternoon, the whole improbable chain of noticing and speaking and refusing to look away. Gordon Pell received a sentence of 9 years. His attorney appealed twice. Both appeals were denied. The Meridian Prime Development Project was permanently enjoined. The floodplain east of Ashford is still undeveloped. In flood season, it fills with water the way it was always meant to, quietly and without destroying anything that wasn't designed to be there. Harriet returned to the bench the following autumn, part-time initially, then full-time by the spring after that. Her neurologist said her recovery was, the word he used was remarkable, which he said with the specific wonder of someone whose models had not predicted it. Harriet accepted this without excessive modesty. She had always believed in the precision of the right correction applied at the right time. She had spent a career trusting that principle. She saw no reason to stop now. On her first day back on the bench, Patrice drove her to the courthouse and walked her to the entrance. At the door, Harriet stopped and turned and looked at her daughter. Really looked, the way she hadn't been fully able to for most of the previous year, and said, "You should go back to Portland. You have your own life." "I will," Patrice said. "Soon." "Soon isn't a date." "March," Patrice said. "I'll go back in March." Harriet nodded. She adjusted the lapels of her robe. She turned toward the door. Then she paused once more without turning back, and said, "Tell Ray his floors are still the best they've ever been." She went inside. The door closed behind her. Through the narrow window beside it, Patrice watched her walk down the marble corridor toward the courtroom, steady, deliberate, hers again, and allowed herself, standing alone on the courthouse steps in the first cold morning of October, to finally, privately, cry. I keep coming back to the moment Ray picked up that amber bottle from under the kitchen sink. He didn't have a medical degree. He didn't have a law degree. He had calloused hands and a dead wife and a 12-year-old son who needed him to come home every night. And yet, he was the one who saw it, not the neurologist from Johns Hopkins, not the rotating team of home health aides, not Patrice, who loved her mother and was doing everything right and was still somehow looking at the wrong thing. There's something that sits with me about that. We spend so much time believing that the people with the credentials are the ones with the answers, and sometimes they are. But credentials tell you what someone has been trained to see. They don't guarantee that a person is actually looking. Ray was looking. He had learned how, the hard way, through Cassandra, through the particular grief of watching a system fail someone you love, while you stood there not knowing enough to push back. That experience didn't give him a degree. It gave him something harder to teach, the refusal to assume that the obvious explanation is the correct one. I think about what it cost him to say something. He was the housekeeper. Patrice was the client. There's a version of Ray Garrett, and I've been this version of myself more times than I want to admit, who notices something wrong and decides it's not his place, who keeps moving because speaking up is complicated and staying quiet is easier. That version of Ray lets Harriet disappear. That version lets Gordon Pell walk away clean. That version lets 47 families keep losing. But Ray had already lived through what silence costs. He knew the specific weight of it, and so when he found the bottle, he sat with it for 3 days, not out of cowardice, but out of carefulness, and then he pulled out a chair and told the truth. That's not a small thing. That's actually the whole thing. What strikes me about Harriet's story is the way it demonstrates that intelligence alone, real intelligence, the sharpest legal mind in Ashford, is not sufficient protection against someone patient and close enough to undermine it. Harriet was brilliant. She was also being slowly poisoned by a man who used her trust as a weapon. The mind can only work with what it's given. When what it's given has been tampered with, brilliance doesn't save you. Someone else's integrity does. And then there's Harriet herself, returning to the bench, finishing the ruling, delivering 43 pages of precisely argued justice from a desk she could barely sit at 6 months earlier. Nobody handed her that. She built it back, slowly, on days when the fog was heavier than the clarity, on mornings when she didn't know what month it was, but still picked up the pen. That kind of persistence isn't dramatic. It doesn't look like anything from the outside. It just looks like someone sitting at a desk doing the work again. Theo said it plainest, the way kids do when they haven't yet learned to make simple things complicated. You noticed something was wrong, and you said something. That's the same as helping. I don't think I'll ever have a better definition of it than that.